Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. If you're working on anything from rap music, electronic music, to metal or pop or punk, then you'll want to know how to mix your drums to make them sound punchy. And in your mind's ear, you can probably imagine what punchy drums would sound like as opposed to drums that smack or pop or knock. There are very different characteristics to those adjectives, but it might feel very vague as to how to mix in order to get your drums to meet those characteristics. When I think of punchy drums, I think about a pretty upbeat tempo of a song, and it's a combination of tone and dynamics. So I want to get rid of that vagueness about what it means to actually get punchy drums, and I'm going to give you some concrete steps in order to accomplish that. I'm going to use this song here, which I think is a good example because it could use some help. I'll show you what the drums sound like. They're good, but they're not as punchy as we want them to be yet. It's a pretty good starting point, but there's a lot of work to do in order to help these drums to become as punchy as they deserve to be. The first step that I would recommend, especially if you're working on live drums, is to isolate each of the channels that you've got and see if you might need to gate out some of the unwanted signals. Because the performer of the drums is playing the whole kit and you've got microphones that are covering the whole kit, it's difficult to isolate and record just one part of the kit at the same time because everything else is so close by it. This recording has done a fairly good job, but you can hear in this kick drum that there's some cymbal bleed coming in. So it's useful to try to gate that out. And I'm just going to use the gated drum setting here on this gate. So the goal with the gate is to try to isolate as much of the sound you want and to eliminate the sounds that you don't want. This is not bad, but I'll use an EQ for the rest of the way. You can see up here, this is all that cymbal sound. It's not really a part of the drum sound, so we can EQ that out. And I'll actually make it a hard. That's better now, right? And it's okay to do that, especially for the kick drum, because those cymbal sounds will be coming in from other parts of the drum recording that has been made here. So it'll come through on the overheads. And the kick drum, we can just isolate the kick drum like that. You can hear it's a very round kick drum, so I'm going to try to focus some of the frequencies with the rest of these EQ moves. Emphasize that thud on the bottom of the kick. So I'm boosting right on that, and then I'm going to dip a little bit just above it. And I'm going to do another dip here. Okay, let's see what we've got so far. Still a little bit of bleed, but that's okay. It won't come through on the mix because we'll have all these other tracks going at the same time. Let's add a compressor here too. With this compressor, what I'm trying to do here is to emphasize the attack of the kick. As I mentioned, this is a very round kick, and so that can actually create a problem if we want punchy drums, because it doesn't have a lot of the sound of the beater hitting the bass drum. So we don't have that transient attack sound that would come with that beater sound. So we can try to emphasize it as much as we can with EQ. And then to emphasize it even further with compression, which will kick in just after the kick hits, and then it'll dip down the volume so that it'll emphasize. I should put my hands the other way. So it'll kick in just after the kick is hit, and then it'll dip down so that just the beginning of the sound is emphasized more so than the tail of the sound. And that will prime your listeners' ears to focus on that beginning of the sound. And that is sort of what we're going to be going for throughout this mixing process in order to bring out the punchiness of these drums. I think that this kick drum is okay for now. So it'll be worth exploring what some of the other tracks sound like too. We'll move over to the snare. And you can hear there's some bleed in there as well, so I'm just going to try to gate out some of the cymbals. This is where it becomes more difficult because some of the frequencies of that hi-hat and of the crash that's being played sort of align with the frequencies of the snare drum, and same with the volume of the snare drum. But we don't want to cut the snare drum too short. And you can tell that there's a little bit of energy at the bottom. We could get rid of that if you wanted. Listen to the snares together. Toms are a very tricky one because they're sort of placed in between both the snare and the cymbals. So the tom mics will often have a lot of trouble picking up only the toms. But if they're isolated on the toms, you can use a gate again. And let's find where the toms are played here. That's a tricky one, but I'm going to leave them there for now. And the overheads are intended to try to pick up a full image of the drum, so you wouldn't really use a gate there necessarily, but it is useful to have some EQ. So in order to allow the isolated kick drum mic to come through, you might high pass just a little bit. There's a bit of a whistling coming through here. When I boost like that, it makes me want to start whistling along with it. And these are the first steps. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a guide for you, and I'll compress it all so that you can just have a one sheet guide in order to go through these and the following steps that we're about to do, so that you don't have to rewatch this whole guide. You can just use it to check off what the next step will be for you to take as you go through it. And I'll put up a link for that as well. You can get it at ediblemusic.com/punchy. Now we've got all the drums grouped together, and this is where the punchiness will really come out when we start using compressors. So I've put a compressor on the group. There it is, right? It's starting to come out. Compression is really useful in order to bring out and push the drums through so that they kind of feel as though they're punching out of the speakers and towards your listener. But I think having just a compressor on the groups might not do it. I think some parallel processing will be useful here as well. Punch means to emphasize the transient, and so as you've been going through the initial drum balance, the gating, and the EQ, and a little bit of compression, those moves have been to balance and put forward that beginning transient information of the sound, the sharp sort of hit that comes on the cymbals or the shells or the snare. And when you do that, when you balance with that foresight from the very beginning, then that's what you will be able to keep your ears trained on as you monitor and add more processing. Now, I think some parallel processing would be useful here, so I'm going to set that up as well. And I'll bring it up. That's parallel compression on the entirety of the drum kit. I'm also going to parallel compress just the kick and the snare. Now I'll add in some of the room mics. I like those last two. I'm going to group those and also compress those. Let's hear those drum rooms isolated. Just a little bit of EQ would be useful here. But I don't actually want to change it here a lot. I just like to de-emphasize some of the parts that might be obstructing the actual kit recording. I'm high passing this one a little higher than the others because I feel like we have enough information on the kick drum from the other microphones that have been recording the kick. So I don't mind taking it out of this one, but I'll boost up top a little bit for some of that nice shiny cymbal sound. A couple more things to do. I think that it's always useful to add some reverb to your snare drum. Adding some reverb to your snare really helps to increase the sense of size of the drum kit, and as a result will help to increase the sense of size of the song. So we'll add some reverb to the snare drum here. You can hear how adding the reverb in extends the length of the snare, in addition to giving it some more height in the mix. If I were to mute that reverb, just focus your ears on how the snare changes as I bring it back in again. It's subtle, but I think it's worth having it in there. Now let's see how I did. We'll bring the rest of the song in. A little bit of volume balancing. Pretty good. I'll show you how it sounds without all of these processing moves, and then I'll turn them back on again to compare. Here's how it sounds without them. Not bad, some good rock and roll drums. And I'll add in the processing that I had before. I think I would do some more work on this, but I don't want to belabor it too long here. But no matter what, the steps will be taken the same way. So if you want to get a good handle on how to work through mixing your drums and try to bring out that punch, again, go to ediblemusic.com/punchy. Have fun.